The sound of a glass hitting the marble floor was louder than the music, a sharp, crystalline crack that signaled the end of the evening's normalcy. It wasn't just the noise, it was the collective, suffocating gasp that followed, rippling through the Virelli estate like a physical wave. In an instant, the calculated laughter of the elite died out. Every eye in the ballroom, including those of the most dangerous men in the city, snapped toward the grand entrance. Someone had just appeared who didn't fit the social script, a figure who radiated a silent, detached poise that commanded the room's entire atmosphere without uttering a single word. In a space where power was usually measured by bank accounts and bloodlines, a new, undeniable force had just entered, and the carefully curated illusion of the Virelli's dominance was shattered before the first word was even spoken. Cassandra Virelli stood paralyzed, her champagne flute trembling as the world she ruled began to dissolve. At the center of the frantic whispers stood Valeria DeLuca, the woman who, only 24 hours ago, had been on her knees scrubbing Cassandra's bathroom grout for a pittance. But the invisible help was gone. In her place was an ethereal presence in a halter-style gown encrusted with $3 million in crystals and blood-red gemstones, moving with the effortless grace of someone born to lead, not serve. Lorenzo Virelli's most trusted associate, a man whose neck tattoos usually signaled he was the one to be feared, stared with his mouth agape, recognizing a look of high society royalty he hadn't expected to see in a maid. The joke, invitation Cassandra had issued to humiliate Valeria had backfired with nuclear precision. As the security detail, men who usually took orders from the Virellis, stood in stunned, watchful silence, it became clear that the social hierarchy had not just been challenged, it had been completely overthrown. The smell of lemon bleach was so thick it felt like it was coating the back of Valeria DeLuca's throat. She stayed on her knees, the cold marble of the master bathroom floor pressing against her joints as she moved the small brush in rhythmic circles. To anyone else, the tile was spotless, but under Cassandra Virelli's roof, clean, was a moving target that was never quite reached. Valeria focused on the grout, her hands moving with a steady habit that kept her mind from drifting too far toward the life she had left behind. For 7 months, this had been her world. She had traded the silk sheets of her mother Isabella's estate for a lumpy mattress in a studio apartment and her prestigious name for a housekeeping uniform. She wanted to know who she was when the money was gone and the doors stopped opening automatically. She had learned quickly that when you wear a uniform, you become a ghost. The heavy click of designer heels echoed down the hallway, getting louder as they approached. Valeria didn't look up. She didn't need to. She knew the sharp, impatient rhythm of Cassandra's walk. "You missed a spot near the vanity, Valeria," Cassandra said, her voice dry and bored. She didn't look at Valeria's face. She looked at the floor as if she were talking to a vacuum cleaner that wasn't working properly. Cassandra stood there, checking her reflection in the gold-rimmed mirror, adjusting a diamond earring that cost more than Valeria's annual salary. "I'll get it right away, ma'am," Valeria replied quietly. Her voice was calm, showing none of the irritation that usually prickled under her skin. She had learned to be a master of the quiet life. Cassandra sighed, a sound of practiced exhaustion. "The gala is this weekend. Everything needs to be perfect. The house, the staff, even you, I suppose." She glanced down at Valeria's scrub brush with a flicker of a cruel smile. "Though I imagine perfect is a bit of a stretch for someone who spends their day in the dirt." Valeria kept her eyes on the tile. She had seen this kind of cruelty before, the kind that comes from people who think their bank accounts make them a different species. To Cassandra, Valeria wasn't a woman with dreams or a history, she was just a tool to keep the marble white. Valeria simply nodded, her fingers tightening slightly around the brush. She had set out to find herself in the silence, and in this house, the silence was deafening. She was learning what it felt like to be completely invisible, even while standing right in front of someone. The afternoon sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the sunroom, but it brought no warmth to where Valeria stood. Cassandra sat on a velvet sofa, flanked by Bianca Moretti and Sienna Rossi. The three women looked like a portrait of polished perfection, surrounded by crystal bowls of fruit and expensive espresso cups that Valeria had laid out just an hour before. "There she is," Bianca said, her voice dripping with a mock sweetness that made Valeria's skin crawl. She didn't look at Valeria as a person, she looked at her as a source of entertainment. Cassandra reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope with gold leaf edges. It was the invitation to the Meridian Gala, an event where a single seat cost more than most people earned in a year. She held it out, dangling it between two fingers like it was a piece of trash she was waiting for Valeria to take to the bin. "We've been talking, Valeria," Cassandra said, her eyes gleaming with a cruel light. "I'm hosting a table at the gala this Saturday. It's the most exclusive event in the city. I've decided to be generous and give you a ticket." Valeria reached out and took the envelope. The paper felt heavy and expensive in her hand, a sharp contrast to the damp cleaning rag she usually carried. She kept her face carefully blank, her pulse steady. "Thank you, ma'am," she said softly. Sienna let out a sharp, high-pitched giggle that echoed off the glass walls. Oh, imagine the look on everyone's face when they see her there. It's going to be the highlight of the night. "Now, don't worry about a dress code," Cassandra added, leaning back and crossing her legs. She shared a look with Bianca, a silent, vicious joke passing between them. "Just wear whatever you have in that little closet of yours. I'm sure you'll find something appropriate." The laughter broke out then, loud and sharp. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. They wanted her to show up in a cheap, polyester dress from a department store just so they could point and whisper about the maid who thought she belonged. They wanted to use her to prove how much better they were. Valeria stood still, the gold-edged invitation gripped in her hand. She let the sound of their laughter wash over her, noting the exact pitch of their mockery. Behind her calm expression, a decision was forming, as cold and hard as the marble she spent her days scrubbing. They wanted a show, and for the first time in 7 months, Valeria was ready to give them one they would never forget. Valeria waited until the laughter faded and the heavy sunroom doors clicked shut behind her. She didn't go back to her cleaning supplies. Instead, she walked straight to her small, cramped bedroom near the kitchen and reached for the burner phone she had kept hidden at the bottom of her bag for 7 months. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pulled it out, the cold plastic feeling heavy with the weight of the choice she was about to make. She stared at the only contact saved in the phone, Mama. 4 months, she had lived as a ghost, proving to herself that she could survive without the DeLuca fortune or the protection of her mother's shadow. She had learned what it felt like to be looked through and stepped over. She had found the strength she was looking for, but Cassandra's laughter had changed the experiment. It wasn't just about finding herself anymore, it was about showing people like Cassandra that the people they ignored actually had voices. Valeria pressed the call button. The phone rang only once before a sharp, elegant voice answered. "Valeria?" Isabella DeLuca's voice was like velvet and steel. "Is it time?" "It's time," Valeria said, her voice stronger than it had been in months. She looked at her reflection in the small, cracked mirror on her wall, the face of a maid, but the eyes of a DeLuca. "I'm done being quiet, Mama. I need the dress from the closing night of the Milan show. The one with the red and yellow stones." There was a brief pause on the other end, then the sound of a satisfied smile. "I've been waiting for this call. You were never meant to stay in the shadows forever, my daughter. You were just learning how to stand in the light." "I need it by Saturday," Valeria continued, her mind moving with the strategic precision of the mafia world she was born into. "And I'm going to need a team. Cassandra Virelli thinks she's inviting a joke to her table. I want to make sure she realizes she's invited the most dangerous person in the room." "It will be there within 24 hours, Isabella promised. "Remind them who we are, Valeria. Remind them that a DeLuca never forgets a kindness, and we never ignore a debt." Valeria ended the call and set the phone down. She took a deep breath, the smell of bleach no longer bothering her. For the first time in 7 months, she didn't feel like a housekeeper. The experiment was over, and the woman who was about to walk into that gala was someone Cassandra Virelli wasn't prepared to handle. The next morning, the sun had barely touched the rooftops of the city when the low hum of a powerful engine vibrated through the thin walls of Valeria's small apartment. It wasn't the rattling sound of the delivery trucks she was used to. This was a smooth, deep growl. Valeria looked out her window and saw a sleek, black sedan pulling to the curb, its tinted windows reflecting the morning light like polished obsidian. Before the car had even fully stopped, four people stepped out with military-like precision. They were dressed in sharp, dark suits, carrying heavy black cases that looked like they held state secrets rather than fashion. At the head of the group was Marco, her mother's lead stylist, a man who had dressed queens and movie stars but now stood in front of a crumbling studio apartment. Valeria opened the door before they could even knock. Marco stepped inside, his eyes quickly scanning the tiny room with its second-hand table and single lamp. He didn't say a word about the modest space. His focus was entirely on Valeria. "Your mother sends her regards," Marco said, his voice quiet but full of respect. "And she sends the masterpiece." Two assistants stepped forward and carefully unzipped a long, silk garment bag. As the fabric fell away, the closing piece from the Milan show seemed to breathe in the dim light of the room. The dress was a work of architectural art, its sheer fabric covered in thousands of hand-stitched silver crystals that shimmered like a river of stars. But it was the red and yellow gemstones running down the bodice that truly commanded attention. They glowed with a deep, fire-like intensity, each one worth more than the building they were standing in. "It's beautiful," Valeria whispered, reaching out to touch a single crystal. "It is more than beautiful," Marco corrected her. "It is a statement. Today, we remind everyone that a DeLuca does not hide." The team moved quickly, setting up a portable vanity and laying out professional makeup kits. They worked with a focused silence, the only sound being the click of brushes and the rustle of silk. Valeria sat in the center of the chaos, feeling the weight of her old life returning to her shoulders. For 7 months, she had been a shadow. Now, as the stylists began to transform her, she could feel the maid fading away, replaced by a woman who was ready to face her enemies. The dress sat on its form by the window, catching the light and promising a night of reckoning. The ballroom was a sea of black tuxedos and shimmering gowns, but the moment Valeria stepped onto the marble floor, the music seemed to lose its rhythm. She moved with a steady, quiet confidence, her $3 million dress catching every beam of light from the chandeliers. Flanked by her mother's security team, she looked less like a guest and more like a queen reclaiming her throne. Cassandra Virelli was standing near the center of the room, laughing with Bianca and Sienna, a glass of expensive champagne in her hand. She was scanning the crowd, likely looking for her maid in a cheap dress to start the night's entertainment. When her eyes finally landed on Valeria, the glass slipped from her fingers. The sound of it shattering against the floor was the only noise in the suddenly silent room. Valeria didn't wait for her to speak. She walked straight up to the group, her expression calm and detached. "Good evening, Cassandra," Valeria said, her voice smooth and carrying through the silence. "Thank you for the invitation. You told me to wear whatever I had, and I thought this would be appropriate." Cassandra's face went from pale to a ghostly white. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Bianca and Sienna stepped back, their eyes wide with a mix of shock and terror as they looked at the gemstones on Valeria's bodice. They knew fashion, and they knew they were looking at a DeLuca original that shouldn't even exist outside of a museum. "Valeria?" A deep, stern voice broke through the tension. Lorenzo Virelli stepped forward, his eyes fixed on Valeria with intense realization. He ignored his wife entirely, his focus solely on the woman he had previously only seen carrying a laundry basket. "You are Isabella DeLuca's daughter." The whisper traveled through the room like a wildfire. The maid wasn't just a girl in a nice dress. She was the heir to the empire that held the keys to Lorenzo's biggest business deals. Lorenzo turned to Cassandra, his jaw tight with a cold, simmering anger. "Cassandra, tell me you did not invite our most vital partner's daughter to our home to scrub floors." Cassandra looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. The power in the room had shifted completely. Valeria stood her ground, watching the woman who had spent months trying to make her feel small. The joke was over, and as Valeria looked at the fear in Cassandra's eyes, she realized that the mask of power had finally changed hands. Valeria gestured toward a quiet, shadowed alcove away from the prying eyes of the guests. Cassandra followed her, her movements stiff and shaky, like a puppet with tangled strings. the loud music of the ballroom became a dull hum, replaced by a heavy, uncomfortable silence that pressed in on them. Valeria turned to face her, the light from a single wall lamp catching the fire in the red gemstones on her dress. She didn't look angry, she looked disappointed, which was far worse. For a long time, she simply watched Cassandra, who couldn't bring herself to meet Valeria's eyes. "Why did you do it, Cassandra?" Valeria asked quietly. Her voice wasn't a weapon, it was a mirror. The invitation, the jokes, the way you treated me for 7 months. Why were you so determined to make me feel like I was nothing? Cassandra's hands twisted together. "I didn't know who you were," she whispered, her voice cracking. "If I had known you were a DeLuca, I never would have." "That's exactly the problem," Valeria interrupted, her tone soft but firm. "You think kindness is something you only give to people who have power. You think respect is a trade you make for business deals. But I want to know why you were cruel when you thought I had nothing to give you back." Cassandra opened her mouth to make an excuse, but the words died in her throat. The truth was right there, raw and ugly. "Because I thought I could," Cassandra finally admitted, her voice barely audible. "Because I thought you couldn't do anything about it. You were just the girl who cleaned the floors. You were safe to hurt." Valeria nodded slowly, let the words hang in the air between them. "That is the price of your cruelty, Cassandra," Valeria said. "You didn't show me who I was. You only showed me who you are when you think no one is watching. You didn't break me, but you might have broken the world you built for yourself." She looked at Cassandra one last time, not with hate, but with a strange kind of pity. "I forgive you," Valeria added, "but you have to live with the person you saw in the mirror tonight. That's a weight even I can't take away from you." Without waiting for an answer, Valeria turned and walked back toward the light, leaving Cassandra alone in the shadows of her own making. 2 days after the gala, the heavy silence of the Virelli mansion was broken by a soft, hesitant knock on the door of the servants' quarters. Valeria was standing over an open suitcase, neatly folding the few plain shirts she had bought with her cleaning wages. She didn't have to look up to know who it was. The confident, clicking rhythm of Cassandra's heels was gone, replaced by a slow, dragging step. "Come in," Valeria said, her voice calm and steady. Cassandra stepped into the small room, and for a moment, she just stood there, looking stunned. She wasn't wearing her designer jewelry or her expensive silk dresses. Instead, she wore a simple coat, and her face looked tired, as if she had spent the last 48 hours realizing just how fragile her world really was. Her eyes wandered over the narrow bed, the single plant on the windowsill, and the stack of books on the floor. "You really lived here," Cassandra whispered, her voice full of a strange kind of awe. "The whole time, you scrubbed my floors and then came back to this tiny room, even though you could have been anywhere in the world." "I needed to know who I was without the name," Valeria explained, placing a book into her bag. "And you helped me learn that, Cassandra. You showed me that even when everything else is taken away, my dignity stays with me. It doesn't come from a dress or a bank account." Cassandra sat down on the edge of the mattress, her shoulders drooping. For the first time in months, she wasn't looking through Valeria, she was looking at her. "I've spent the last 2 days noticing things," Cassandra said quietly, her eyes filling with tears. "The way the driver holds the door. The way the kitchen staff looks at the floor when I walk in. I realize now that I never saw them. I never saw you." Valeria stopped what she was doing and looked at her former boss. She saw a woman who was finally beginning to understand the cost of her own arrogance. "I want to be better," Cassandra said, her voice barely audible. "But I don't know if I can undo what I've done." "The noticing is the first step," Valeria said with a small, encouraging smile, the first real smile she had ever given her. "Most people never even get that far. You were cruel because you thought it was safe, but now you know that no one is safe to hurt. Everyone is a person, Cassandra. That's the only truth that matters." Valeria zipped up her bag and picked it up. She walked toward the door, leaving Cassandra sitting in the room that had once been a prison but was now a place of truth. As Valeria walked out, she didn't look back. She had found the answer she was looking for, and she was ready to go home. 8 months later, The air in Paris was crisp, and the lights of a private venue near the Seine glowed with a warm, inviting hum. This was not a typical fashion show where people were judged at the door. Tonight, the Invisible Circle collection was launching, and the world was finally paying attention to the hands that built it. Valeria DeLuca stood backstage, peering through a small gap in the heavy velvet curtains. Her heart raced, but not with the fear she had felt months ago in the Virelli mansion. This was the excitement of a woman who had found her purpose. In the front row, where celebrities and billionaire investors usually sat, there were 50 special guests. They were nannies, housekeepers, and hospital orderlies, the very people who usually moved through the world like ghosts. Tonight, they were the stars, dressed in beautiful pieces from the new collection that they had helped inspire. The music began, a steady and soulful beat that filled the room. As the models walked out, the clothes told a story. Every stitch and every pattern had been designed in collaboration with domestic workers, honoring their strength and their history. Valeria watched as a woman in the second seat, a housekeeper she had met weeks before, pressed a hand to her mouth, her eyes shimmering with tears as she saw her own life's work reflected in the art on the runway. Isabella DeLuca stepped up beside her daughter, taking Valeria's hand in a firm, proud grip. They stood together in the shadows, watching the front row react with joy and disbelief. A portion of every sale from this line would go directly into a scholarship fund for the children of these workers, ensuring that their hard work would build a bridge to a better future. Scanning the back of the room, Valeria spotted a familiar face. Cassandra Virelli was standing near the exit, holding a glass with both hands. She wasn't at the center of the crowd anymore. She was watching quietly from the edges. She had flown all the way to Paris, not for a business deal, but to see the world Valeria had built from the ruins of their old life. Valeria let go of the curtain and took a deep breath. The maid who had scrubbed floors in Chicago was gone, and the mafia princess who hid in the shadows was gone too. In their place was a woman who knew that true power didn't come from a $3 million dress. It came from making sure that no one else ever felt invisible again. After the show ended, Valeria walked toward the back of the room where the exhibition panel stood. Each photograph showed a domestic worker with their name, their years of service, and their dreams for their children. It was a gallery of lives that people usually ignored, and it was the most beautiful part of the evening. She found Cassandra standing in front of a photo of an older woman who had worked as a hotel housekeeper for 22 years. Cassandra didn't look like the woman who had laughed in the sunroom 8 months ago. There was a softness in her eyes and a humbleness in her posture that felt real. "I needed to see it," Cassandra said, her voice quiet and sincere. "I needed to see what you built from what I tried to break." She looked at Valeria, and for the first time, they were equals. "You could have destroyed me that night at the gala. You had every reason to, but you didn't." Valeria stood beside her, looking at the same photograph. "Destroying you wasn't the point, Cassandra. The point was that people need to realize that every person has value before the dress and before the name. They are someone simply because they are a person. That's all it takes." Cassandra nodded slowly. "I'm volunteering now at a training center. It's hard, and I'm realizing how small my world used to be. Thank you for being someone worth learning from, even when I didn't deserve it." Valeria picked up 2 glasses of champagne from a passing tray and handed one to Cassandra. "We're all works in progress," she said with a kind smile. They touched glasses, a silent toast to second chances and new beginnings. Later that night, Valeria returned to her hotel room and looked at her reflection in the mirror. She thought back to the 7 months she spent scrubbing grout and living in a tiny studio. She realized clearly, for the first time, that she had never actually lost herself. The money, the DeLuca name, and the $3 million dress could all be taken away, and she would still be Valeria. She had gone looking for an answer, and she finally had it. The measure of who you are isn't what you have. It's who you remain when everything else is gone, and how you treat those who have nothing. With a satisfied heart, Valeria turned out the light, finally ready to start her life as her own woman.